You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You're listening to Tea Break Time Travel, where every month we look at a different archaeological object and take you on a journey into their past. Hello and welcome to episode 24 of Tea Break Time Travel. I am your host Matilda Siebrecht, and today I am savouring a tea which is called East Frisian Herb Garden, and my goodness, it is so good. It is the most fragrant tea I think I've ever had, with roses and mint and everything. I feel like I'm in some, I don't know where I feel like I am, but it's very, very nice. And joining me on my tea break today is jewellery historian Sigrid van Roode. And what are you drinking today, Sigrid?
Hi, Matilda. Tea as well this morning. A nice green herbal tea. And you will be very pleased to learn that I'm drinking that from a jewellery-themed mug.
Oh, exciting. What kind of jewellery theme?
Well, our National Museum of Antiquities has a wonderful collection of cameos from ancient times, from ancient Rome, ancient Greece. Mm-hmm. And they have these incredible photographs that you can just pretty much use for everything. So I printed them on a run-of-the-mill mug, and now I have $1 million mug.
I mean, I've always one for improving mug collections by adding a little bit of historic or archaeological inspiration to them. And of course, as we mentioned, you are not in fact an archaeologist, I believe. You are a jewelry historian, but did you also study archaeology? Did you study history? How did you get basically to where you are today?
Well, how long does this tea break take? Well, I studied Egyptology. That's what I started out with. That's what I did my master's in also. Okay. And during my Egyptology studies, we went to Cairo, of course, because it's really useful to be in Egypt when studying Egypt. And that's where I came across, let's say, modern vintage jewelry. So we're switching from 2000 BCE to 2000 CE right now, 4,000 years of a jump. And that's where I came across vintage jewelry from, say, like the 1900s, 1950s. Oh, wow. I thought, well, that's interesting. What is this? That's where it all started. Okay. Simple question. What is this?
That's always a good place to start these things.
Right.
And so when you were doing Egyptology, you weren't necessarily originally focused on the jewelry. That was indeed something that came later?
That is definitely something that came later, because Egyptology is, with us, it's very much focused on texts. So lots of reading, lots of language stages, absolutely fascinating stuff, by the way, really interesting. And of course, there's an archaeological component. So you do learn how to excavate and how to record and how to publish your findings. But then the jewelry part for me came a little later, I think.
Okay, interesting. And how did the interest in Egyptology then first start?
You know, I have no idea. I've always wanted to do this since I can remember. You know, I was one of these little kids in primary school. Then when you have to do a talk for your class, then people would be talking about like my dog or the name of my cat, and I would go like Ramesses II. So I don't know. I've always wanted to do this.
It's interesting though, because one of the things that I always find as an archaeologist, one of the sort of assumptions or the stereotypes that people assign to archaeologists is that everyone was always interested in Egyptology. It always seems to be, and you either have people who are interested in, who got into it because of Indiana Jones, who got into it because of history, or who got into it because of Egyptology. That's sort of the three main avenues, it seems to me at least.
Well, it happens a lot when I explain to people what I do. Like, I'm an Egyptologist, then the first reaction very often will be, oh, I wanted to study that when I was a child, but then, well, they chose a profession that would actually pay. I can imagine. But there is a huge interest in Egyptology. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, no, it's just also such a big, I always find it quite hilarious when people find out I'm an archaeologist and they say, oh, what do you think about, and then ask me some really specific Egyptology question. And I go, I have no idea. Like, I am as clueless as you about Egyptology. And even if you study Egyptology, I mean, it's such a broad, like, area of study. We had one episode so far with Dr. Colleen Darnell, who is also, of course, an Egyptologist, and we were chatting a little bit about that with her, but I'm curious about your experience with that. I mean, do you feel like you have a general understanding of the whole of Egypt, the sort of ancient Egypt, or did you have to specialize in a particular time period or region or something like that?
It's totally impossible, at least for me, to have an overview of the whole of ancient Egypt. It's 5,000 years.
Yeah.
And it's a huge country, which at times, of course, was even larger in antiquity. And there is such a wealth of culture, of history, of political developments, of economic developments, of religious developments. It's mind-blowingly impossible to grasp it all. But for me, it was, well, it sounds really boring, but I thought it was absolutely fascinating. A very obscure part of funerary rites of the Old and Middle Kingdom that actually occurs in these 5,000 years of history. I think a grand total of 8 times. That's what I did my master's on. Nothing to do with jewelry.
No, okay, I was about to say, was there jewelry involved? But no, okay, not even.
No, not even.
Although the sort of funerary rites and, well, for want of a better word, ritual, but you know what I mean, kind of ceremonial aspect, I suppose, is something that you still investigate quite a lot in your jewelry studies, I believe.
Absolutely. Because let's call it magical part of jewelry, the way it carries meaning, the way you can use it as an amulet, the way it's used in rituals, that is absolutely fascinating to me because I just love what humans can do with their brains, like how they find out science, how they come up with these amazing technological concepts thousands of years ago, and figuring out how the world works. Magic is a part of that, and that is what really appeals to me.
Yeah. Oh, and it's true. We should all have a little bit of magic in us, really. So it's nice to know that it did exist in a way in the past. Maybe it exists still now. And of course, this is a tea break, but it's also a tea break with time travel in it. So the classic question that I'm sure everyone who studies anything to do with the past always receives, but I nevertheless always ask my guests it as well. If you could travel back in time, where would you go and why?
Well, my standard answer would be, ancient Egypt, of course. But then there is when in ancient Egypt.
Yeah.
Gosh golly.
Maybe to one of the 8 funerary rites? Or
perhaps, but that might be a bit depressing. I don't know, maybe to see how they built the pyramids or sit on a jewelry workshop. But that would be my standard answer. But since I've come to work in the archaeology of Northwestern Europe, maybe I also would like to go to Merovingian jewelry artists and see how they did that waffled background in these inlays of garnet in gold. How? So it's undecided, either of those two.
You can do a sort of a 2-stop tour. You can do a tour through the jewelry of the past.
Yeah, I can ask Doctor Who to take me anywhere, right?
Exactly, yeah. There you go. And out of curiosity, because this is something we've chatted about it once or twice on this podcast already. If you would go back in time, would you want to be able to actually interact with the people, or would you prefer to be a kind of fly on the wall just watching?
Fly on the wall, definitely. I would like to watch what they're doing without my own presence inserted in it. Yeah. And that's even assuming I have a universal translator that magically speaks ancient Egyptian, because I think I would be, I don't know if they burn people at the stake, but I think my chances would be really good.
What was, out of curiosity, the language in ancient Egypt? How did that develop? Did that develop into Arabic? Was it a completely separate language? How did that fit in?
It's a separate language, but part of the same family group, so of the Semitic languages, with a little bit of African languages mixed in. Okay. So it's very distinct. But one of the most amazing things when I got to modern Egypt was learning that languages sometimes do not change all that much, the words in particular. When I was sitting in a cafe and asking for the bill, that was the exact same word that an ancient Egyptian might have understood. And I was like, wow, that same root, because Arabic works with roots and ancient Egyptian does as well, is still valid. How amazing is this? I can actually speak ancient Egyptian and they might sort of get me. That's in one word, cool. Not a grammatical sentence.
Yeah. They might not really understand why you want to pay for a coffee, but, that's all. The cultural translation, I guess, is a whole different side of things in that respect. But, well, thank you very, very much for joining me on my tea break today. I'm excited to get into discussion. But before we look at today's, object or material, we're first going to journey back around 5,000 years to the region of what we would now call Turkey. It's morning. The sun is already climbing high in the sky, casting its rays over the plains and the low hills. In the shadow of one of these hills, the relative peace of the morning is suddenly interrupted by a faint but persistent sound of hammering. We venture forward, skimming our hands through the tall grass, and see an opening split into the rock, propped up with wooden beams. Crawling in further between these beams, we witness figures spaced alongside a tunnel, each one hammering against the walls with a range of different tools. One of the figures grunts in sudden satisfaction as they manage to pry from the rock a misshapen lump that shines in the faint beams of sunlight filtering through the entrance. The lump is tossed into a nearby basket, along with more lumps of a variety of sizes, all of them gleaming and reflecting with an almost, one might say, silvery sheen. And this may be, of course, completely incorrect. I was looking up pictures of raw silver, and it did look slightly silvery to me, but maybe the raw material is actually a bit duller. But today, indeed, we are looking at silver jewelry, to be precise. But we're first going to talk a little bit about silver. But before we do, we're going to have a very, very quick break. So we will be back soon. Welcome back, everyone. So, of course, those of you who listen in regularly to the podcast will know that I usually like to first look at the most asked questions on the internet about the particular object we're looking at, courtesy of Google search autofill, in order to see what other people are wanting to find out about this object. And seeing as we have Sigrid here today, we might get some answers. Although, actually, there was surprisingly little in Google autofill questions about silver. A lot of the things about silver seem to be related to price and cost and how much things, you can sell things for and all of that kind of stuff. But one question that did come up quite a bit in various forms was, what was silver used for in ancient times? Which I'll allow you to interpret that question to answer how you will.
That is an amazingly broad question indeed. So in ancient times, it was used a lot for jewelry. So like beads and bracelets and necklaces and things like that, but also to make little statues. In the Roman period, for example, you have little statues of your household gods, which might be in silver. So yeah, basically, because silver used to be, and this is something that very few people realize, in ancient times could be way more expensive, more valuable than gold.
Really? Okay. Well, do you know why that was?
But for ancient Egypt, I know it was because silver does not naturally occur in Egypt itself. So it had to be imported. And it's also a little more difficult to work than gold. So you have to transport it from large distances, and that makes it rare.
Okay, interesting. And when did that change then? I mean, because I'm just trying to think. As far as I can think, gold's always been seen as, the treasure or something. Was there a particular reason that silver started to become more kind of common?
I think when it became more widely available, so in the first millennium, this is when coinage was invented. What silver was also used for, but that's much, much later. My vision of antiquity is 5,000 BCE or something.
The modern period after the turn of the century.
Very, very modern after the first millennium BCE. But that's when silver also started to be mined in, for example, India, because you have these huge trade routes opening, and that is when it becomes more common.
I see. Okay. Oh, but that's really fascinating that silver was the prized possession in those days. And I mean, that relates a bit, you mentioned coins there, that relates a bit actually to the other question that came up a lot. Like I say, it was mainly silver coins, how much cost silver coins, how much can you buy them for, and all this kind of thing. But a lot of the questions were about why are silver coins important? And I guess maybe a question would be, why are coins so important to look at from a historical perspective or from an archaeological perspective?
Well, to be honest, I don't know much about coins because, as you know, archaeology is insanely wide field, and coin studies is a whole different ballgame, also for me. But you can, of course, use coins for dating purposes. Also very interesting in the field of personal adornment is that when you have, for example, Roman coins, you might have an image of the Roman empress on it, and she would be dictating the latest in fashion. So coins that spread through the empire would also be used as sort of like little influencer tokens. So people would look at the coins and say, ooh, this is the hairstyle I've got to sport right now. And then everybody would go and do that. So
Amazing. Which, if you think about it now, I'm trying to think of our like, you had the Queen, who of course is with us no longer, but I think she basically had the same hairstyle and the same look in every single coin. But it would be really cool if she had a different hairstyle in each one. That's really interesting. I didn't realize that. And were coins therefore used? Because I know that nowadays you're technically not allowed, I think, to, if a coin is a valid coin, then you're not allowed to like drill a hole in it and use it as jewelry and that kind of thing. But were coins also quite often, because I imagine a lot of cultures that interacted with cultures that used coins didn't have coinage yet. Like they didn't use coins as a kind of system of money. So do you also see a lot of coins used in jewelry?
Definitely. That's also because in antiquity, the value of the coin was dictated by its silver content or its gold content. So there's not an abstract standard that defines currency, what your coins is worth, but it's the actual coin. So you could also just easily cut it in half and then you would have two halves, which you could still pay with. Something we can't do.
I was trying to do that at the coffee shop down the road.
I just, here, have half euro.
Exactly. So I don't have 50 cents. Oh, but look, I have a euro coin. Let me chop it up. Oh, that's really interesting. So you see a lot of kind of chopped up bits of coin.
Yes, yeah, you do. And you also see a lot of chopped up bits of silver, which equal the amount of silver that would have been in coins. You see this, for example, in periods where times get troubly, when there's wars, when there's unrest, when there is not sufficient coinage flooding into the areas that need them to pay with. Like at the end of the Roman Empire, for example, there is not enough coinage in the world for the Romans to pay their mercenaries. So what you see is chopped up silver, chopped up drinking vessels, chopped up trays, and their weight matches that of the worth of, silver coins that would have been used to pay soldiers and army parts.
And I imagine if we're finding them archaeologically, that means that they didn't like melt them down and make them into something else. They just carried around then like half a drinking cup worth of silver.
And then, of course, it was smashed to bits and pieces. And some you also see them folded several times so they would be easier to carry. And then you could just pay with that because the worth in silver is what matters, not how it was decorated or how old it is. In short, all of the things that we value an object by today. Like, this is really rare and it's beautifully worked. And look at this wonderful object that was like, okay, it's this much grams of silver. Great. That's what it's worth.
Oh, wow. I'm now just thinking, I remember there was a Viking exhibition I went to and they had, I can't remember if it was a hoard or if it was just sort of an exhibition space, part of the exhibition, which showed different parts of jewelry. And I think there were some that were really squashed or bent out of shape or things like that. And I'm trying to remember now, but I think that might have also been what you were talking about. They called it silver bullion or something. No, silver. I can't remember what the word was, but yeah, which is that's really interesting now that I'm thinking about it. But that's such a shame though, with these beautiful bracelets and they were just flattened and twisted out of shape and
yeah, it's their weight that counted.
Yeah. Oh, can you imagine being a jeweler and you've spent hours creating this beautiful object and then you see it in someone's pocket the next day cut in half with something else? I mean,
actually, there is one interesting story that I could tell you very quickly about the relation between Vikings, coins, and running rampant.
That sounds good already.
Yeah. So this was in the 9th to 11th centuries when we're going all over the world right now. So this story is going to be in Western Europe, in Scandinavia, and in Central Asia.
Okay.
And we're starting in Central Asia, where there were several local rulers. They were officially part of the Arab Empire, but they were more like franchising, you could say, like running their own game and acknowledging the Sultan nominally, like, okay, you're the guy, we pay taxes, but otherwise just leave us alone. It's like a kingdom in a kingdom situation. And they traded with people from Scandinavia along the shores of the Volga. That's sort of like the meeting point. Scandinavians, they would come and they would trade honey and furs and slaves as well, sadly. And then they would get paid in silver coins, in dirhams. That were then minted in like Tashkent and Samarkand and, all these Silk Road cities.
Yeah.
But franchising takes up a lot of money. because you have to pay off pretty much everyone, and to keep up your own lavish kingdom, you need cash. So the silver mines in Central Asia became depleted over time.
Okay.
And as a result, these coins devaluated. There was more copper mixed in, more other materials, so the silver content dropped. The people in Scandinavia loved these silver coins. They used them also to melt down and make jewelry from their wives. So a lot of the Viking jewelry, you could say, is made of these dirhams that were melted down. But then all of a sudden they realized they were sort of getting scammed because these coins were devaluating. They were not as high in silver content as they were before. So they expressed their discontent, shall we say, but there was not much more to get from Central Asia. And this is one of the reasons, combined with economic decline and climate change, why they ran these plundering expeditions to Western Europe, where there was a lot of silver to be found in monasteries and churches. And so you see how these raids of the Vikings are not just isolated incidents. They actually have a long history. And they're the outcome of several factors, including people franchising for themselves in Central Asia.
Amazing. And people who just loved silver. I mean, the Vikings just really liked silver.
They really did. Gorgeous jewelry.
Oh, wow. That's really cool. And I remember learning about the sort of trade routes indeed between Scandinavia and kind of Central Asia. And it's just so fascinating I think so many people have this opinion of, especially prehistoric. I mean, that's sort of on the edge of prehistory and history, that they just kind of stayed in their little places and they didn't move around and they didn't interact with other cultures, and it was all very isolated. But it wasn't. It was so connected, everything.
Absolutely, and jewelry is a perfect source to tell us this, like the grave in Birka in Scandinavia also, where they found a silver ring with an amethyst, which contains an Arabic inscription.
Wow, okay.
So jewelry traveled, and it shows us how people were actually way more connected than we sometimes give them credit for.
Yeah. And okay, so on the topic of jewelry, because silver jewelry is your speciality, one might say, or jewelry in general. I don't know if it is silver jewelry or if it's just jewelry that you specialize in.
It's just jewelry in general, but when it comes to like the recent Middle East, it's silver jewelry.
Okay. And so how does sort of that silver jewelry differ then from jewelry made from other kind of precious metals? Is it just a case of what's available at the time, or what's sort of more culturally wanted, or are there other reasons for a kind of preference for silver in certain areas?
That really depends on either the geographical area and the time frame that we're talking about. Because in some periods and in some regions, silver was more, like we just talked about, more expensive because it was rarer. It was associated with the moon, with this silvery light of the moon, and as such was a beautiful counterpart to gold, which was then associated with the golden rays of the sun, of course.
Right. Okay.
In other time frames, you see that silver is the cheaper version of gold jewelry.
Right.
Because it became more common, it became more available. And then, of course, there are time frames in which silver jewelry is completely different from gold jewelry, and it's really a category of its own.
Well, okay, interesting. And what sort of, you've already mentioned a couple of things about why jewelry is important in looking at the past, but I mean, what would you say if you had to give a kind of elevator pitch, for why we should study ancient jewelry or why we should study silver jewelry, but jewelry in general, what would be your kind of argumentation?
Well, my elevator pitch for studying jewelry, that's very easy, because jewelry is an actual historic source which tells us so much about movement of people, about availability of materials, about spheres of contact, like coins. This is going to be a very long elevator ride. I hope we're...
That's fine. That's totally fine. We have time.
Great. So, like, when you look at coins worked in jewelry, you can see, this coin is from here, this coin is from there, but those coins do not travel further than. So that tells you something about the spheres of interaction of people. Mm-hmm. You can see from the inscriptions, from the techniques used, how they influenced one another and how civilizations are actually more connected, both geographically and in time. And it's portable and it's gorgeous.
It is pretty. And it still remains pretty to the modern day. I don't think I've seen any kind of ancient jewelry that I've ever been like, oh, yeah, I mean, it's fine, but it's not really that great.
But that's another thing. It's so incredibly relatable. Whenever I do a talk about jewelry, it doesn't almost matter what the talk is about, because the pictures themselves are what get people excited. And then you tell the story with it. So there is an amazing amount of information that you can just cram into slides with jewelry. Yeah. And people will always be like, oh, I didn't know that. That is interesting. Didn't think of that. It's a really easy way of sharing history with people.
Yeah. And do you see that the jewelry develops a lot over time? Does it change a lot throughout time? So, for example, a particular region that you specialize in, I don't know whether that would be Egypt or somewhere else in the Middle East, maybe. Do you see that there would be would you be able to look at a piece of jewelry and say, that's definitely from this time period because it's that style? Or is it quite does it have a long living history in that respect?
Both, actually.
Okay.
Jewelry changes a lot over time because ancient Egyptian jewelry is nowhere near similar to modern day Egyptian jewelry. But when you trace developments over time and you check you see these influences of different styles being mixed in, it's very easy to see the development from ancient Egypt to today. And there are, of course, some long-standing favorites like crescent moon symbolism that way predates Islam, for example. It's now a very famous symbol, but it's much older than that. The use of the eye, also used as in ancient Egypt, still present in eye beads, and you can trace that development over time. Reversely, I would say, you do need to be able to trace that development over time, because it's very easy to say, oh, this looks like that, and there's only 4,000 years in between. Yeah. But that doesn't make it a direct descendant.
Okay, so you have to know a lot about the context as well, I guess.
Yes, yeah, that's imperative.
Okay, interesting. And I had another question that I just thought of, actually, in terms of, because of course it is, a lot of jewelry is made from precious metals such as silver and those kind of things. It's very unlike a lot of other archaeological objects that I've kind of featured so far on this podcast have been things that I've been trying to share with the public because I think they're really interesting and fascinating, but maybe from an outside perspective, they're made from, a more boring material, or they don't look quite as fancy, or all that kind of thing. But I imagine silver jewelry, as we've said, has a very different reaction from people. But I can imagine there's also a negative side of that. So is there a lot of problems in terms of ancient silver jewelry, antiquities, vintage jewelry in that respect of being sold on things like the black market or being stolen from places or anything like that?
Oh, don't get me started. Absolutely. That is spot on. I think the biggest problem with archaeological artifacts, whether they be jewelry or other things made from precious materials, because these materials are still valuable today. And their antiquity only adds to their value. So yeah, there's a lot of metal detecting going on that is illegal. There's also a lot of metal detecting going on with people actually sharing their finds and allowing them to be studied. And so that way we may actually learn from the past. But there is a lot being just dug up illegally and sold. And then you have all these people, look, I have a Roman ring, a Greek ring, medieval ring. And then my heart just breaks a little, because I think within its context, this ring could have told us so much more.
Right.
And now it can't. It's just an object instead of an object in context. And that's the archaeologist in me. I need the context to go with it.
So, I mean, even if people would find something, would make sure to, document it all correctly and everything, and then they might still be able to keep the ring afterwards. But you would recommend that people try to document how they found it, where it was found, etc., before they take it.
Well, I would recommend actually not to dig it out at all, unless it's, of course, very close to the surface, but to call in archaeologists and have it excavated. We've had here in the Netherlands some amazing results of excavations that were carried out as a result of metal detector finds.
Okay.
And it was just mind-blowingly fantastic what we learned about the sites where these things were found. There's one example of a coin hoard that was found that turned out to be a early medieval sort of sacrificial ritual place.
Oh, wow.
Where over the course of consecutive centuries, people would have come and offered to whatever gods they thought were present there. That story would never have been available if it was only just, oh, look, it's a gold coin, the end.
Yeah.
So context is everything.
Yeah, so it might just look like a little bit of silver jewelry, but maybe you'll be part of an even bigger adventure if you try to collaborate with
Let's share the bigger adventure.
And maybe a final little question before we go into the next break. What would you say is your favorite fact related to silver jewelry?
Oh, that's a good one. I think for me, it would be its versatility when you look at the way silver has been used over time. I don't mean its technical versatility, but how it's valued. So it can be top of the bill, the most amazingly expensive material that you would use for the gods. And simultaneously, it can be the material that you use for a cheap knockoff. That is amazing. Which other material in history does that?
Right. Yeah. And again, dependent on the context.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a very good fact. I like that one. Okay, so we're going to have another very quick break so that those listening can have an opportunity to top up their tea, but we'll be back soon for the final part. Welcome back, everybody. Hope the teacups are now fuller and the biscuit jar is emptier. So, Sigrid, we did already introduce you a little bit and your experience in the sort of first section of this episode, but maybe we can go into a bit more detail about your specific experience. So we talked a bit about your Egyptology background, but in terms of kind of jewelry historian, what exactly is a jewelry historian? How does one become a jewelry historian?
Well, to be honest, I have no idea how I ended up here. It just sort of happened. So a jewelry historian, unsurprisingly, looks at jewelry. And there are several ways to interpret what it is we do, because there are those of us that work more like an art historian. So they will be able to date and describe and place jewelry in an art historian development. And then there are those of us that sort of more like archaeologists also place them in their cultural, technological, economical, social, religious context.
Okay, that sounds good. So again, it seems the theme of all of these things, archaeology, Egyptology, jewelry historian, is that it's very broad. Each one
it is. So
sort of,
you've got wiggle room to do what you like.
Yeah, which is great in that respect. And you mentioned that it's sort of, there are more sometimes there's more similarities to archaeology. What would you say, having had experience in both, would be the main kind of difference between what you're doing now versus sort of the training that you had in archaeology and Egyptology?
Well, to be honest, what I'm doing now is pretty much how I think it should be done. So it's actually what I do is archaeology, but then with jewelry. So I still look at an object in its context always, because that is second nature to me. And you see sometimes in jewelry history that jewelry is observed as a standalone object. Like one of the examples that I often use is with the traditional jewelry of the Middle East that I specialize in. If you only look at the jewelry, you're going to miss out that the same patterns occur in henna tattoos, in dress weaving, in basketry, in buildings. So placing everything into context is really important to me. And I think that might be a difference with more like traditional jewelry historians who really go in the art historian development of jewelry as a standalone object.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, we're seeing it as a special object, I suppose, in that respect, rather than seeing it as part of a group of other interrelated parts.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's really nice. It just reminded me of I remember you did a series of Instagram posts at some point where you were sharing photos of people from Middle Eastern cultures in the historic period that were wearing jewelry, and you were pointing out how they were wearing it wrong. Like it wasn't the right way to wear that jewelry. They'd obviously just been photographed. Like maybe you could expand on that a bit, because I found that really interesting.
Yeah, the stage photographs. Yeah, so in the early 19th century, you got this development of photography and also of travel and of colonization. And
good old colonization.
There we are again. Well, it happened.
Yeah.
Then you have this is a perfect mix of people wanting to share what these exotic new lands that they ended up in look like, and how beautiful the women were adorned with jewelry. Because imagine in 20th century, early 20th century Europe looks completely different from the exuberant abundance of contemporaneous Middle East. So they would send photographs home. They would create a sort of scenes and type of photography where you sort of catalog people. It's unbelievable, but they did that. And then
gosh,
they dress up people in whatever jewelry they find lying about, just to make them even more exotic. And these, in turn, are now often used as sources for the study of this particular type of jewelry. And what I wanted to do with these Instagram posts is point out that even photography is not really reliable when it's constructed.
Yeah. And I found them very interesting. For anyone who's listening who wants to check them out, I think I can't remember when they were done, but if you scroll a little bit down in the profile, I'm sure you'll find some. They were really, really fascinating. I'll try and find some specific examples and put them in the show notes, because that was something I hadn't even thought about before. And it really... Because, like you say, you think of a photograph as like, oh, yeah, but it's a photograph. Of course it's real. But like you say, it's still staged.
Well, that happens a lot when we're trying to reconstruct how people looked in the past. And very interesting crossover between both my fields of expertise, I'd say, is when traditional jewelry from the Middle East is used to portray people that supposedly lived in the past. So you have an image of, for example, a Roman lady, which then will be decked out in Yemeni jewelry. And I'm like, why? Why would you do this? And the large Afghan cuff bracelets that were created in the 1980s specifically for the hippie trail and for belly dance things, they were used to be put on sturdy looking soldiers, like Roman guys.
True.
Just to make them look more Roman. But
I think I know the ones you mean. Yeah. I can picture them in my mind.
And that's to me is mind-boggling, because first, antiquity has its own splendid jewelry, and you can actually make replicas of that. There are tons of experimental jewelry experiments going on, making traditional jewelry from ancient times. So, like replicas, that's amazing. That's one culture. And then there is the culture of like Afghanistan, of other countries in the Middle East that stand on their own as well. Why would you conflate the two? It's just, I don't get it. Don't get it.
Would you say that that's improving in recent years in terms of the research that's being done and the kind of representation or depiction of the past?
Sadly, no.
Okay.
One of the posts that you were talking about that got a lot of reactions was a post of a lady that was wearing a head jewel as a face veil. So what would have been on the top of her head was mounted in front of her face to look like a face veil.
Right. Okay.
That was 100 years ago. A couple of years ago, I visited in Berlin the Pergamon panorama. Absolutely beautiful site, reconstruction of ancient Pergamon and the Pergamon altar. And it is populated with people who were photographed and mixed in. It's an artwork. It's not a rendering of the truth. It's an artwork, this I should say. And there I saw the same thing. So I was looking around there, admiring how all of these people were reconstructed and how meticulously it was done. And then I saw another woman, supposedly in antiquity, wearing a headdress as a face veil. And then I may have exclaimed, "Oh no, not again!" And there were lots of people looking at me like, "What's wrong with her?" Because I started just sort of talking, in myself, ranting more like it. But no, we still use traditional jewelry from another culture to conjure up an image of the past.
And it's such a shame because, I mean, like you say, you were admiring, the way that the other ones have been done, but it may be, I suppose, that there's certain things that you see, and if that's not your particular area of expertise, then you might think, oh yeah, that's done really nicely. But then if you actually know it, you'll go, oh no, but if that one's done wrong, what's the rest of it? How real is the rest of it, actually?
Yes, and far be it for me to be the authenticity police, of course. That's not up to me, certainly not in an artwork. But I'm just stunned that you would do such meticulous research on the correct rendering of the Pergamon altar, so the architecture itself, and then populate it with people you just sort of randomly dress up in whatever you find lying about.
Like a fantasy universe, a little bit of an amalgamation of everything.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. And speaking of research though, so you are affiliated with a university, I believe, but then you are sort of almost classified as an independent researcher, would you say? Or how would you define yourself in that respect?
Yes, independent researcher, definitely. Yeah. So I'm affiliated with Leiden University now because of my PhD that I'm doing there, but I'm doing that as an external candidate.
Okay. And in terms of, because we've had sort of a range of guests on the podcast, some of them are crafters, some of them are academic researchers, some of them have their own businesses. What would you say are the kind of advantages or the disadvantages of working as an independent researcher in a research topic that's sort of very specific like the one that you have?
But it definitely has advantages in that I can totally chart my own course. I really can do whatever I think is best. And so that also comes down to identifying things that I would like to research that I think are important.
Yeah.
A disadvantage is I'm not part of an academic group that I can just walk over to, bounce ideas around, and just be a part of. But I found that academic tribe on Instagram, that also where I found you, actually.
Yes, true.
We found each other.
We did.
That is amazing. That is... It's lovely to have this platform with like-minded souls working on things that interest me.
Yeah.
And one major disadvantage of being an independent researcher is that when I will have finished my PhD, I will no longer have access to the university library.
Yes, right.
Which is a bit of a drag because that's where all the interesting stuff is.
Yeah. Well, and imagine not even just the library, but also having that affiliation allows you to read lots of online journals and things as well. Yeah, I'm finding that as well now, that's a really big issue.
It's not so much the library itself. I mean, they won't kick me out when I show up. It's just open for the public. Anyone can go there. But the ease that I have now in reading, exactly as you mentioned, the journals and just looking up something on this or something on that will all be gone in a few months.
Yeah. Hopefully it might be possible at some point to have an almost sort of external affiliation for independent researchers.
That would be really nice.
Right? It would be really useful. I'm trying to work that out for my various projects. But anyway, it's got too many projects going on. So there's all sorts of things happening. And so for others who might be thinking, okay, well, I don't really want to do sort of the university career side of things, but I do really love research. What sort of advice would you give, or, to put it another way, maybe looking back at sort of the path that you've taken, would you have done anything differently? If you could speak to your sort of younger self, what do you wish that you had known then that you know now?
The younger self, I would definitely have screamed at, learn Arabic for God's sake. Because my Arabic is very, very limited. It's just only spoken Arabic that I picked up in Egypt, which is really stupid because now I cannot read the whole Arabic side of research on jewelry, which is really, really a shortcoming. So that is something that I definitely would impress on younger me. And otherwise, I would say to people who would want to pursue this path, just go for it. Just do it. You can make your own career. You just have to stick with it and keep going.
Yeah. So I guess it's one of those scary things, right? Of taking that big first step.
Yeah, but I think I've always paired it with an actual job as an archaeologist here in the Netherlands, mostly part-time. So that way I had a job that I absolutely love and an income. And the time that I'm not working in my actual job, I can go to my other actual job, which is being an independent researcher.
Yeah, nice. And I mean, worst comes to worst, you have a lot of silver materials that, you can fall back on, right? And we've just worked out it's not about the objects, it's about the material it's made from. So you have a lot of accumulated wealth in that respect.
I do, yes.
I can't imagine that you would sell it for the material content, though.
Absolutely not. No, my research collection is something that I really love because it allows you to just keep on returning to it when you find out something new. This is present here as well and never looked at it. That's amazing.
Yeah, I can imagine. I mean, gosh, when I see the pictures of your collection, it just looks fantastic. I really want to visit it in person one day.
You will be most welcome.
Yeah. And final question. So have you got any exciting projects or research ideas coming up that you are able to tell us about?
Oh, absolutely. Because drum roll, I'm about to finish my PhD, which will be in June of this year, I hope. So that will also see my new book coming out, and that will be about jewelry that was used in Egypt of the 19th and 20th century CE by women who believed they were possessed by a spirit. And they would have a ritual that involved jewelry, and well, the whole book is about what they did with that jewelry. So super excited about that.
Yeah, very exciting. And June, so that means, because this episode will be released end of May, so it'll be imminent. Once if you're listening to this, it's either imminent or it's out. So have a look. If it's out, I'll try to put it in the show notes, or at least put where it can be found.
And I'm also going to be working on a couple of museum collections that I'm very excited about, just to help them with their inventory and correct descriptions and perhaps make a publication out of it. So lots of fun things to do.
Exciting. Excellent. Well, on that note, I think I'd better leave you to it. Sounds like you've got a lot to to get back to. Thank you very, very much for joining me today, Sigrid. I'm really glad that you could take the time today to chat to me about silver and jewelry.
Well, thank you for having me, because you know me, I always love to rant about silver and jewelry.
And if anyone wants to find out more about Sigrid's work, maybe read her upcoming PhD thesis, etc., or find out more about silver jewelry, check out the show notes on the podcast homepage. I'll put all of the links that I can on there. I hope that you enjoyed our journey today. If you want to help support this show and all of the other amazing series that form the Archaeology Podcast Network, you can become a member of the APN. You'll be helping us to create even more amazing content. You will also have exclusive access to ad-free episodes and also bonus content like our quarterly online seminars looking at different topics within archaeology. For more information, check out the homepage at archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. I hope that you enjoyed our journey today. If you did, make sure to like, follow, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and I'll see you next month for another episode of Tea Break Time Travel.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Cultural Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Rachel Roden.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.